Hey everyone, Richard from Digital Foundry here, and this is a very special presentation of Sea of Thieves running on the Xbox One X, 4K resolution, but we are using HDR rendering here. Joining me to talk about it, John Linneman. So, John, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, this is great. Honestly, this might be one of the most impressive HDR games I've seen yet. Second only to perhaps Gran Turismo Sport.
Wow, that's high praise indeed. So what is it about this that kind of sets it apart?
Okay, so the main thing here for me is that the game really takes advantage of dynamic range in a way that I don't feel we often see in HDR games. I mean, that's kind of the point of HDR, but you still tend to get, even though you get those bright highlights, it still feels like a lot of the darker stuff isn't necessarily as dark or shadowy as it could be. Whereas with Sea of Thieves, there's this real approach to making things like torches, the sky, the sun, super extra bright, and then darker areas like caves or when you're out in the storm on an island, they feel really dark. And when you contrast those two together, it kind of creates this nice atmospheric feel to the world that really drew me in a big way. And it's something you lose somewhat when you go to SDR.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and I think from my perspective I would kind of describe it as stark, and it kind of matches the artistic style of the game itself. It's not high on detail, it's actually quite simple, and that's kind of reflected in the HDR implementation, which really is, it's kind of almost extreme in a way. You know, when you see those torches, the sun, even the specular highlights on the ocean as you're sort of travelling along at sunset, it's quite remarkable, and I'm not sure it would work on a more realistic looking game, but on a more sort of cartoony style title like this, actually works really well.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's kind of key in defining the atmosphere in HDR. Like you say, even at night, the specular highlights from the moon, it does give you that intensity of like standing outside on a dark night and looking up at a super bright full moon. That is quite impressive to say the least. And you're right, it probably wouldn't work as well in a realistic game. I mean, Gran Turismo Sport focuses on high intensity highlights, but doesn't go as dark on the other end, which kind of makes sense in that case. So yeah, for me it really is just about that dynamic range.
Okay, and let's actually talk about just the process of activating HDR itself, because I don't think that things are entirely correct here. So let's take a look at this footage here. This is the same scene, and what I've done is captured it in HDR and SDR, and obviously I've mapped the SDR footage into the HDR space for this video. But the point is that on the HDR side, things are rather green. Now, I was thinking to myself, okay, maybe it's just my cable, maybe it's just the capture equipment, maybe it's my TV. But I went through and isolated each of those things, and the same thing would happen randomly on each boot. And, you know, okay, so maybe it's an issue with my Xbox, but you had the same issue as well.
It manifests rather randomly, as you say. Like the first session I ever had with the game, this issue occurred where everything was kind of green, and I hadn't played it yet, so I just kind of assumed they were going for sort of a dark and stormy feel because it was storming at that time. And then I loaded it up the next day and I was like, wow, this looks like so different than anything I saw last night. Like the range and variety is incredible here because it looks so unique.
Yeah, and you turn off HDR in the system level settings and suddenly everything looks fine again. So yeah, this is a bit of a weird one here because I was actually wanting to do a much longer video, and we sort of buddied up last night to do some team play, but nothing that I could do would make it work. So I actually had to use my existing footage here, and it's a shame because, you know, when it's working correctly, I think you're right, this is one of the most compelling HDR presentations I've seen, certainly one of the most stylistic, and it fits perfectly with the kind of aesthetic that they're going for with the artwork. And I don't think it would work in many other titles, but on here, at its absolute best, it just looks absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, I agree, and I hope we see more games take advantage of this because it seems like getting that range just right, that's the big challenge of mastering an HDR.
Yeah, and another thing I think we need to discuss is, well, when I went into this video, it was going to be a Sea of Thieves showcase, and it was, you know, the way forward was obvious. Go for PC, you know, roll out the Titan X, run at 4K 60Hz with HDR, and, you know, happy days, we'd have the best version of the game running. But it wasn't to be.
No, that's the thing, right? So as is the case with many titles these days, you have to enable it in Windows, which does set your TV to HDR mode with tone mapping, and everything's rather dim. So some people were confused because you would start up Sea of Thieves and your TV would still be in HDR mode, but what you're seeing is not actually HDR. It's just the SDR image tone mapped into the HDR space, and it looks completely wrong, and there are no options in the game to adjust, and thus I think it's fair to say that there just is not support for proper HDR here.
Yeah, and that's a real shame because, that would be the ultimate iteration of the game. And I think on a more general level, I'm just I don't know, I think it's time to start advocating for better support on HDR on PC generally. I mean, it is the most forward-looking platform, but in terms of HDR support, Xbox and PlayStation blowing PC away at the moment, it's just not right.
Yeah. That's the thing though, is I always hear the excuse that, well, there's not a lot of PC monitors with HDR. And that may be the case, but a lot of people, including myself, spend a lot of time playing PC games on TVs, especially HDR-capable TVs. You can't get an OLED monitor for a reasonable price or in the size that most PC gamers would want after all, so it kind of makes sense that you want to play PC games on a nice screen like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you could get an LG OLED for, approximately the same price as a top-end monitor. Plus, you're getting 55-inch. Plus, you're getting pretty much the best HDR implementation in the consumer space at the moment. Plus, you're getting a TV.
Yeah.
So, I'm not buying that for a second. But the other thing, of course, is that we won't see adoption unless the software is there. Nobody's going to be making the screens unless the software is out there.
Exactly.
So, the fact that, there's titles like this which really should support it. I mean, obviously, it's baked in at the engine level. The fact that it's not there, really disappointing, which means that yes, we had to run this one on the Xbox One X. And something else that is kind of a bit weird is performance. I saw your analysis, and performance actually seems worse for me on my X running under HDR than some of the clips that you had. And I think there's kind of a big question mark about Sea of Thieves performance at the moment anyway.
Yeah, that's the thing, is it does seem quite variable in a way that's difficult to replicate. I would say launching into, say, the tavern or certain caves, depending on when I go there in different sessions, there does seem to be a variation in how severe the tearing is, which I can only assume and hope is just a bug, and perhaps with the update they have planned for this week, it will be taken care of, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, I think they've aimed high on this one. 4K resolution on the X versus 900p on the base unit. Now, typically we see a 4 times resolution increase going from base to X, and this is obviously a fair bit higher. Hopefully there'll be happy news in the days to come.
It does seem like adaptive resolution would be the answer here.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up there. Please do like and subscribe if you'd like to see more HDR footage on the Digital Foundry channel. And of course, this video is available to grab from our website, digitalfoundry.net. Our Patreon users can download the original source file. But that's all from us for now. Thanks for watching.